Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Shanahan, thank you for being here, and let me join in the chorus of praise for General Dunford. General, thank you for your many years of service to our country. I mean it from my heart. Secretary, we just received last week a supplemental funding request of $377 million to pay for the last year's involvement of the Department of Defense and the Southwest Border Mission. It's very clear this mission is going to continue into the next fiscal year. So why is there nothing in the President's budget request to continue funding this mission?
This was the essence of the comment General Dunford was making. We really need a more formalized plan, and I'll be working with Acting Secretary McAleenan to ensure we identify the appropriate resources so that we can sustain the appropriate level of effort.
There was a statement that's been made publicly by Department of Defense and others about a clear line of demarcation between the mission of the Department of Homeland Security and the mission of the Department of Defense. Yeah. The longer this Southwest Border mission continues, the line of demarcation starts to blur in terms of where we're drawing a line saying this is not a military responsibility, this is law enforcement, immigration, internal security responsibility. What assurance can you give us that this age-old line of demarcation will be respected?
There'll never be a blurring of the line in terms of law enforcement. We do not provide law enforcement. We never have. We never will. Our role is to support DHS.
I know it is, but let me ask you specifically. I understand that HHS has visited 8 Department of Defense installations looking for sites to house unaccompanied children. They include Great Lakes Naval Station in my home state of Illinois. So in this relationship between HHS and the Department of Defense, where do things stand with their request for military housing?
They've made requests to us to provide housing. Our role in providing housing to them would be turnkey. So if there's something that's identified that we agree to support, we would prepare and then hand the keys over to HHS.
When will the decision be made as to whether military housing will be provided?
I'm going to ask David Norquist to answer that question. David?
Let me take it for the record in terms of when we have that.
For the record, okay. Secretary Shanahan, last week many of us participated in a classified briefing on threats in space. We certainly have incredible capabilities in space, and there's no doubt that we need to protect them. However, it's not clear how the proposal for a space force would improve the effectiveness of 15,000 space professionals who are currently on the job. Why does it make more sense to establish a $2 billion space force bureaucracy within the Air Force or separate from it? Would it be better use of taxpayers' dollars to invest that funding into new satellites, new rockets, and new approaches?
Thank you for that question. The $2 billion, in my view, is overstated. I think that detracts from the real value of the Space Force. The fundamental proposition of the Space Force is, given the change in the environment that space is now contested, is the status quo sufficient? It isn't. The Space Force represents 2 significant changes. One is provide the command authority when it comes to protecting our economy and our defense assets. That's a fundamental change in mission, that we resource that. And then secondarily, how do we deploy new capability that isn't burdened by red tape and leverages so much of the commercial innovation that's occurred in space? And maybe I'd ask Chairman Dunford for his comments from the perspective of, he's seen the Pentagon face problems before, and our approach generally is we react after something negative has occurred. I really think we're on the front end of helping to ensure that we sustain our competitive advantage. Chairman?
Vice Chairman Durbin, what I would say is that an organization that is singularly focused on recruiting people, training people, the path of capability development, the doctrine in space, has a better chance of giving us the kind of focus that I believe we need. I've watched this now over the last couple of years. I've been on my own personal journey on the Space Force to make a recommendation. in 2017. I wasn't convinced that we needed a Space Force. Over time, I have been convinced, based on the eroding competitive advantage we have vis-a-vis China and Russia in particular, and what I see to be the future, the interdependencies we have, that an organization, again, that has that singular focus would posture the department to better deal with one of only 5 domains that we have in our warfighting doctrine.
I'm going to close with one question, and at the risk of spoiling your plans to publish a book, I'm going to ask you, after 40 years of service in our military at the highest levels of leadership, what is it as your part that you would point to as the most significant development or significant challenge that we face?
You know, Vice Chairman, first, there's no danger of spoiling the book that won't be written. I can assure you of that. But the one thing that, you know, I came in, my Painter base date is 1975. So I was around as a platoon commander during the Vietnam days. And so when people talk about a hollow force, I was actually on active duty in 1980 when it was a hollow force. And what we had was an imbalance between our people, our training, and our equipment. And I have lived through now the development of the force that we have today. And I'd give our Vietnam veterans a lot of credit for rebuilding the force after Vietnam and the force we have today. And I would just tell you that the single biggest change I saw was a qualitative change in the people that we have on active duty from the 1980s, 1990s, and through today. And I think the men and women that we have today, in terms of their intellect, in terms of their fitness, in terms of their commitment, is really the most important thing we have. And I think we all know that, but I walk away having that lesson reaffirmed to me over the last couple of years.